towards reforming the organization and its bodies, specifically the Security Council, with a view to enshrining pluralism, collective security, and upholding human rights, all the while tackling the challenges of climate change and ethnically and ideologically motivated terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, Sudan commends the choice of theme for this topic, for this session, Unity and Diversity for the Advancement of Peace, Sustainable Development and Human Dignity. We welcome the priorities set by the president of this 79th session. Furthermore, it's important to implement the outcomes of the Summit of the Future, especially as regards United Nations reform and Security Council reform, so that these bodies can put an end to the protracted crises threatening international peace, as well as to achieve consensus and harmony in the relations between states and peoples. Unilateral measures taken outside the United Nations framework in complete violation of the UN Charter and international law, political and economic restrictions, these are the main drivers of instability, especially as regards security, the economy, and also on the political front. All of this fuels war. However, I must also add that double standards and selectiveness are currently prevailing in international affairs. There can be no doubt about it. Sudan is facing very serious challenges. And in fact, a war is being waged. There's a conspiracy. A war is being waged by a group that has rebelled against the state for many years. It's receiving political and logistical support at the local and regional levels. You've all witnessed the crimes, the violations, and the atrocities committed by these rebels, targeting the Sudanese people and the Sudanese state. The war began with an attempt to seize power through force. With time, it's transformed into a total war against the Sudanese state and the Sudanese people. Countless crimes have been committed: ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, and genocide. All of this has been committed by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which should be considered a terrorist group. This militia is continuing to perpetrate crimes, and it is most unfortunate that it is receiving the support of some states in the region. States which are providing funding and mercenaries for their own political and economic benefit, in flagrant violation of law and international will. Mr. President, these terrorist groups have also hit diplomatic missions, other organizations, and property. They have not spared the UN, and in fact, UN headquarters, the UN office in Sudan, has been targeted. The Dagalo family has been violating all laws and all international obligations with impunity. The family refuses to comply with the Jeddah Declaration and rejects UN Security Council resolutions regarding the arms embargo imposed on Darfur. Thus, ethnic cleansing crimes are continuing. Most recently, we also recorded a violation of the resolution on El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur State. This begs the question, why has the international system not taken any firm or dissuasive measures vis-à-vis this group and those who support it? Despite everything that's been done, all the crimes we witnessed, crimes against humanity, war crimes, despite their refusal to implement Security Council resolutions and decisions adopted by regional organizations, all the more reason to call for Security Council reform to avoid this policy of impunity and double standards becoming key characteristics of this organization. Ladies and gentlemen, this devastating aggression being waged by the RSF with the support of states in the region providing funding and mercenaries as well as weapons to the RSF have resulted in deaths of dozens of thousands of Sudanese and the displacement of many millions more. Sudanese people have been forced to leave their lands, their motherland, to evade these armed groups. They've taken refuge in various regions. Millions more Sudanese are living in peace today in other parts of the country. Systematic attacks committed by the militia are contributing to the suffering of our compatriots. As a result, we've been seeking a peaceful solution to the situation, and the Jeddah Declaration, dated May 2023, should have been enough to put an end to this war. And yet, regional political players who are in favor of the war have a different take on the situation. This has resulted in the situation we have on our hands today. As a result, so as to alleviate the suffering of our fellow Sudanese and to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we've opened our borders and airports. We've lifted all impediments to this aid being delivered. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Sudanese government is steadfastly committed to facilitating humanitarian assistance, protecting humanitarian convoys and personnel, as well as medical personnel. We fully uphold international humanitarian law and measures geared towards the protection of civilians. The protection of civilians is our responsibility, especially when women and children are being hit the hardest by violations committed in areas controlled by the militias. Some women and children have even been sold in marketplaces. The humanitarian crisis affecting a large majority of our population, owing to the aggression being waged by the Dagala militia, require us to act in concert with one another. It's necessary to provide assistance to millions of displaced persons and refugees. On our side, we're doing everything within our power so as to ensure that aid is delivered to those who need it most. We would like to thank all neighboring states who've welcomed displaced persons and refugees. We thank organizations providing assistance to the Sudanese people as well. President, we face a very tall challenge. This organization must shoulder its responsibility, specifically so as to protect developing countries in the face of the avarice of some other states who would like to control our people's riches through the use of force, and specifically through the use of money. We hope that the will of our people will prevail. Numerous crises, including the one underway in Sudan, are the product of a policy of double standards, as well as political approaches based on exerting power, economic blackmail, and the fact that the organization has not managed to deter those who defy the will of their people and of nations, threatening international peace and security. Mr. President, today we have a marketplace of initiatives. Some of these initiatives serve narrow interests, and the corrosive effects of this are patently obvious. In our countries, artificial conflicts are growing in number. For this reason, we need national ownership, this particular principle, and that's why since the start of the crisis, we've done everything we could to put an end to this war and to spare our country from the destruction being waged by the Dagalo militia, attacking the Sudanese people. Thus, we contributed to various constructive initiatives, and we still harbor hopes of ending this conflict so as to guarantee the dignity of the Sudanese people and the sovereignty of our state. We are hoping to ensure that the conflict will not be resumed and conflicts will end. The path towards an end to this conflict is clear in our view. First and foremost, we need to put an end to the hostilities. The militias must withdraw from all of the areas they currently occupy and from which people have been displaced. They must lay down their weapons so that people can go back to their homes and so that assistance can be delivered. This will also facilitate the reopening of roads, airports, and the resumption of production. Second, this end to hostilities must be accompanied with a comprehensive political process so that we can see through the political transition, avoiding the resumption of war and potential coups d'etats. Mr. President, the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, is one of the state's oldest institutions. It's non-politicized. It's very much in favor of a democratic transition, and it's committed to the right of the Sudanese people to pick its leadership. This is why the SAF is upholding the commitments undertaken as part of the glorious 2019 revolution, so that a consensus government, an elected government, can accede to power. We will never accept a return to the previous regime, which was rejected by the Sudanese people. Thus, we are very much committed to facilitating the transition process, moving towards a civilian government. We will continue pursuing peace, working with all groups who have laid down their weapons, as well as with groups who still carry weapons but who are willing to respect the Juba Peace Agreement signed in 2020. Throughout this war, the Sudanese armed forces have done everything they possibly could, continuing to uphold international humanitarian law as well as the Geneva Conventions and protocols thereto, working to protect civilians and to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We stand ready to partake in all initiatives that can help to put an end to this war. As soon as we have an initiative that would respect the principle of national ownership and will put an end to the control and occupation of our territory by this rebel militia. We are also in favor of all initiatives which will protect civilians and guarantee the dignity of our people. These are the prerequisites for a return to democracy. It's unacceptable for a government as well as for the Sudanese people to partake in these, to see organizations who've supported the war, states who've supported the war and massacres of Sudanese partaking in such initiatives. Some of these organizations and states have allowed weapons to be funneled through their territory to the militias. And they've also provided political support to these rebel groups. We must therefore continue acting to convince the aggressors that they shouldn't be receiving this assistance. Mr. President, I'd like to thank all of the states as well as the organizations and various human rights defense groups, as well as civil society organizations, all those who've tried to paint a true, accurate picture of what is happening in Sudan. I welcome the outcome of the Summit, the Great Lakes Summit in Rwanda, and the meeting that took place in Yaoundé. There, at all of these meetings, the RSF were described as a rebel group working against the state. We've managed to circumscribe the activities of this group and deter them. Hopefully, we'll be able to deter them from acting in a similar fashion in other countries. The RSF should be called should be called out for what they are. They've rebelled against the state. They're committing terrorist crimes and should be considered as such here at the United Nations. Mr. President, before I conclude, I'd like to reassert our position vis-à-vis the issue of Palestine and the right of the Palestinian people to establish an independent state within 1967 borders. It's necessary to put an immediate end to the aggression being waged in Gaza and in Lebanon. We also call for Palestine to become a fully fledged member of the United Nations. By way of conclusion, we'd like to extend our gratitude to all those who've supported us through these testing times. Millions of Sudanese still need your help. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to reiterate that the will of the Sudanese people will prevail. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of the Sudan. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Carlos Manuel Villanova, President of the Democratic Republic of São Tomé and Príncipe. I request protocol to escort His Excellency, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, distinguished head of state and government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor that I address this honorable assembly, representing São Tomé and Príncipe, a small island state which, like so many others, face the complex challenges of our time. On behalf of the people of São Tomé and Príncipe, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, And I would also like to extend to the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, our warmest congratulations. Excellencies, it is easy for me, as it is for anyone present in this assembly, to say that what stands out in relation to international issues is the uncertainty and insecurity that marks both the present and the future. As a small island state, my country is on the front line of the consequences of climate change, and the climate crisis represents the greatest existential threat to our populations. Although we are responsible for a tiny fraction of global greenhouse gas emissions, we are among those who suffer most from its impacts. Sea level rise, more frequent and intense storms, coastal erosion and loss of biodiversity threaten not only our livelihoods, but also our very existence. It is therefore imperative that the international community strengthens its commitment to the Paris Agreement and ensures that the voices of the most affected nations, like ours, are heard and integrated into concrete actions. We call for global action that is not only ambitious, but also urgent. COP29 on climate change, to be held next November in Baku, Azerbaijan, will be a crucial opportunity to reaffirm the collective commitment to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius. However, commitments have not been sufficient. We need concrete, immediate actions to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis. We call on the largest emitters to meet their historical and moral obligations by drastically reducing their emissions and honoring the climate financing promised to developing countries, which are paying the price for a crisis they did not cause. In addition, we call for an expansion of financing mechanisms for adaptation, as we need to strengthen our resilience. We are already investing in innovative adaptation solutions, such as sustainable use of our marine resources and the implementation of renewable energies. However, our efforts need to be scaled up, and this requires the support of the international community. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, remain a beacon for our progress. For us, sustainable development is not a choice, but yes, a necessity. Our vision of the future is based on the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is in this sense that we strive for a balance between economic growth, environmental protection, and social justice. However, the deadline for achieving them is fast approaching, and for many of us, there is still a long way to go. Support for development must be renewed, and new models of partnership between nations must be explored. We reaffirm our commitment to the SDGs, but without an international environment that promotes fair trade, accessible financing, and peace, our efforts will be limited. We ask for the support of the international community so that our transition to a green economy can be accelerated, and so that together we can be examples of how sustainable development can transform societies and ensure prosperity for future generations. On the other hand, we cannot fail to mention the importance of strengthening multilateral institutions and ensuring that all states, regardless of their size or economic power, have a voice in global decisions. Multilateralism is our best tool for tackling collective challenges that transcend borders. Ladies and gentlemen, global peace and security face growing threats, from armed conflicts to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The African continent continues to be the scene of protracted conflicts that result in deep and unacceptable suffering. These conflicts demonstrate the need for greater diplomatic intervention and African solutions to African problems. Sao Tome Principe calls on the international community to step up efforts to mediate and support the peaceful resolution of conflicts in Africa while respecting the sovereignty of nations. Peace is the foundation on which we build development. Unfortunately, we continue to witness the escalation of conflicts in various parts of the world, such as the recent worsening on the situation in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon. Sao Tome Principe reaffirms its firm commitment to the principles of peace and human rights and calls for respect for sovereignty of states and intensification of diplomatic efforts for the peaceful resolution of conflicts. There can be no development without peace, and peace is only possible with justice. Excellencies, the future we want must be built on the foundations of cooperation, solidarity, and mutual understanding. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the interdependence of nations and the need for joint responses to global challenges. We need to continue strengthening multilateralism, promoting the sharing of knowledge, resources, and innovative solutions. Sao Tome Principe reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the principles that govern this organization. We believe that, through dialogue and cooperation, we will be able to tackle the greatest challenges of our time, from climate change to poverty, to the promotion of human rights and equity. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations celebrate this year 79 years of existence. This is a lifetime that gives the UN a special status. Indeed, this observation cannot be taken lightly. In fact, it has been almost 8 decades of intense work and unrepeatable experiences like no other organization has achieved in the efforts to obtain and maintain peace and achieve other global public goods. On this occasion, we must praise the inescapable commitment of the Secretary General, whose action on all fronts touches us deeply. Faced with our persistent dilemmas, it is imperative that we bring a new content of hope to the world stage. This is an unavoidable objective and role of the United Nations, but this mission is also ours. The world's current affliction is not inevitability. If we empty the United Nations and if each state incurs the spirit of each fighting for itself, then the result will be to live with no answer global problems such as wars, economic crisis, environmental crisis, and other ills. The world has changed since the creation of this organization. The international system, like its institutions, must evolve to reflect the realities and needs of today. We advocate for the reform of the United Nations Security Council to make it more representative and effective in its mission to maintaining global peace and security. The multipolar world we live in today demands a more inclusive and dynamic UN. In saying this, I emphasize the need to think of Africa as a part of the world. We cannot continue with a Security Council that reflects the power structures of 1945, a period when most of the current African states were still under colonial rule and therefore had no voice in international affairs. This underrepresentation of the continent is also evident in other structures of global governance, such as the international financial institutions, and we urgently need to change this. Excellencies, I would also like to take this opportunity to echo a call that has resounded here in this assembly for decades: the need to put an end to the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed against the Republic of Cuba. This blockade is outdated and contrary to the principles of peaceful coexistence and solidarity between nations. The Cuban people have shown resilience, but it is time for the international community, in particular the United Nations, to intensify its efforts to correct this injustice in the name of peace and human dignity. We also reaffirm our support for Morocco's sovereignty and congratulate the political initiatives developed in the search for a peaceful and credible solution to the dispute. We also welcome the strategic projects launched by the Kingdom of Morocco, such as the Morocco-Nigeria gas pipeline and the Atlantic Africa Initiative, which reflect the vision of regional integration and sustainable growth. Excellencies, in conclusion, we would like to reaffirm that our presence here is a testimony to our faith in the United Nations and its ideals. Despite our limited resources, we bring to the global table our tireless will to contribute to a fairer, safer, and more sustainable world. São Tomé and Príncipe is ready to do its part and continues to work hand in hand with all the nations present to build a better future for all. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Democratic Republic of São Tomé and Príncipe. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Majesty King Letsie III, King of the Kingdom of Lesotho. I request protocol to escort His Majesty, and I invite him to address the Assembly.